I thought I had found my forever. But forever was an illusion, crafted by the one man who was about to break me in ways I never thought possible. It's strange how you can look back on your life and see the warning signs so clearly, like neon arrows flashing in. But in the beginning, all I saw was the fairy tale. And when you've been starved of even a fairy tale, that's where I was when standing at the love wasn't. My career was stable, my independence enough to keep me from falling into loneliness. I told myself but deep down, beneath the armor of that night, my best friend Linda. I walked into that ballroom, polite small talk. I didn't just walk into the. There was a gravity about him, a presence that drew people without even trying. He was tall, sharp in a tailored suit that looked not flashy, with a smile that felt rehearsed but devastatingly effective. When his eyes landed on me, it was like the spotlight shifted. He moved toward me with purpose, weaving through the crowd as if the entire gala existed only as a backdrop to this moment. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," he said, with a voice that carried warmth laced with teasing confidence, and I laughed because he was right. That one line, so simple, so perfectly timed, slipped past my defenses. That was Ethan's specialty, making you feel like he saw straight through you, not just your surface, but into the hidden places you didn't show anyone. In reality, he was rehearsing, performing, perfecting. But that night, it felt like destiny. He stayed by my side the entire evening. He asked questions, not the shallow kind that men use to fill silence, but questions that felt like bridges. What I loved most about my childhood, what dreams I had, what scared me when no. He made me feel like my answers were. By the end of the night, I didn't just feel, I felt chosen. Our first date came 3 days later, and of course it was. He sent flowers to my office, white roses, with a note that said, "Dinner is on me tonight. Wear what makes you feel most beautiful." He didn't just invite me. He curated the evening as if it were a story he wanted me to tell for the rest of my life. That night, under a string of lights at a rooftop restaurant I'd never heard of, Ethan became my story. He was attentive without being overbearing, funny without being crass, and vulnerable in just the right doses to disarm me. He told me about his hard-working parents, his struggles to prove himself, his big dreams for the future. He said he wanted more than success. He wanted love, a partnership, a family. How could I not fall for that? The days and weeks that followed felt like being swept into a current too strong to resist. Morning texts that made me feel like his first thought. Late night calls where his voice softened just enough to make me feel like he trusted me with his unguarded. Thoughtful surprises that weren't just about money but about meaning. A book he knew I loved in high school. A playlist he created just for me. A quiet picnic in the park after I had told him I was too stressed to go. I had dated before, but no one had ever made me seen, chosen. Ethan had a way of wrapping me in a bubble where my friends adored him, my parents were, even strangers seemed to. It felt perfect, but perfection is never free. Looking back now, I can see how Ethan's perfection was calculated. He never let me plan our dates, always insisting he wanted to surprise me. He encouraged me to spend less time with certain friends, framing it as wanting me all to himself. He always kept his phone face down, but explained it away as being present with you. And every time a sliver of doubt crept in, he was ready with a smile or a gesture so flawless, it made me feel guilty for it. That's how manipulation works. It's not always loud or sometimes it comes in the sweet text and whispered promises under the stars. When Ethan proposed, I said yes without. It was at the park, cherry blossoms in bloom, a string quartet playing softly in the. He dropped to one knee and told me I would. Everyone around us, strangers can. For a moment, I truly believed I had won. I wore that ring like a shinst. It meant nothing. I built dreams. I planned a future capable of hurting me, but dreams are fragile when they are built on lies. And behind Ethan's perfect smile, a secret was one that would rip apart everything I thought I knew about love, about him. If I had looked closer that night, the storm behind but love blinded me. Late, because the man I had chosen to marry wasn't the man I thought he was. He was something far darker. When love feels like a whirlwind, you don't see the cracks forming. You're too busy being carried away, dizzy on the rush, telling yourself that storms like this are rare and only meant for people lucky enough to stumble into them. That's how it was with Ethan and me. Too fast, too intense, too beautiful to question. And the very speed that felt intoxicating was the same force that would end up destroying me. After he proposed, I didn't stop to breathe. I didn't pause to question how quickly everything had moved. I dove headfirst into the fantasy he painted, convinced it wasn't just a dream, but destiny. From the very beginning, Ethan had made everything feel larger than life, as though our story was scripted to skip all the awkward chat and head straight for the weeks after his were like stepping into a movie montage. He whisked me away on beaches where we ran, cozy cabins in the rooftop dinners where even ordinary a late-night grocery run turned into a walk in the park. He made falling, but at the time, every night ended long conversations, and his voice steady and sad was rare, sacred. He knew exactly what I'd lie awake after, but love that burned. My friend saw it. You know I adore Ethan. I brushed her off. You just know. She didn't push, and she wasn't the only. At a family dinner, my father asked Ethan. Ethan answered smoothly, but later that night, his voice was Johnny. Good men don't need. Sure you know who he because a tiny hidden part of me wondered if he was right. Still, I silenced that voice. I told myself my parents' skepticism came from being protective. I convinced myself my friends' worries were rooted in jealousy or misunderstanding. After all, how could anyone else possibly understand the intensity of what Ethan? That's what love does when it blinds. It makes you mistake warnings for noise, concern for interference, and doubt for Ethan's gestures grew even grander the more people questioned us. Almost as if he could sense when I was rattled, he would appear with overwhelming affection to sweep away any hesitation. If I expressed stress, he'd plan a surprise. If I looked distracted, he reinforced again that outsider, and I believed him. He had this way of making me, not through anger or but with the gentlest don't let other people's fears steal away, looking at me. And just like that, he made me equate. The deeper I fell, it wasn't obvious that I still saw my friend, but slowly I stopped sharing I defended Ethan fiercely, even when no one was where once my heart had. I told myself proof of devotion, that real love was, but the truth, molding my identities that used to feel. The thought barely had. I texted Ethan, and minutes later, his voice smooth. He told me love doesn't follow, that when something feels, and I wanted so believe that leaping was. My friends continued to worry. My mom tried to ask gentle questions about whether I'd thought through what marriage really meant. Even Linda, usually outspoken, grew quiet, watching me with the kind of sadness you feel when you can see a storm coming, but know you can't stop it. But nothing could touch the bubble Ethan had built around me, a bubble of romance, devotion, and perfection. I wish I could tell you I saw through it sooner, that I had the strength to question the pace, to listen to the voices of people who loved me, but I was too far gone. I had mistaken the rush for depth, the speed for destiny, the obsession for love, and in doing so, I ignored the cracks forming beneath us, cracks that would eventually split wide open and swallow me whole. If only I had listened, if only I had paused long enough to let reason speak, I would have saved myself from the biggest heartbreak of. But by the time I realized the truth, it was already too late, because Ethan's love wasn't just fast, it was dangerous. Every girl dreams of the perfect proposal. Mine felt stolen, and maybe that's why I fell for it so complete, because the night Ethan asked me to be, I wasn't just saying yes to him. I was saying yes to the family, yes to the version of love I had, yes to a story so flawless. After weeks of whirlwind romance, after ignoring my friend's warnings and wasn't content with simple, the kind of spectacle that happened on a warm spring, one of those nights, he told me we were going to dinner, just a little surprise. He had that mischief, the one that made me feel like a co-conspirator. I didn't ask questions. By then I had trained myself. Part of me enjoyed the. We arrived at the botanic place I loved, but the moment we stepped, casting golden light was too vibrant to be. Soft music flowed, but then I noticed the way, the subtle smile, gas rippled through the. Could barely hear his words, but I saw his lips move, and I'll never forget the way he looked at me. So steady, so certain, so flawless. You are my forever, he said. I can't imagine a life without you. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down my face before I even realized I felt like the universe had bent itself just for me, arranging this perfect man, this perfect moment, this perfect love. My voice shook as I whispered, yes. And the second I said it, cheers erupted around us. Strangers applauded. Someone shouted, congratulations. The quartet shifted into a soaring melody, and Ethan slipped a sparkling diamond ring onto my trembling finger. It was dazzling, more than I ever expected, the kind of ring that caught man's attention. I stared at it through my tears, the weight of it pressing against my skin, and then he pulled me into his arms, kissed me deeply. For those few seconds, the world disappeared. The proposal wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. That's what I didn't see then. Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted my family, my friends, strangers even, to witness to see him as a kind of man no one. The photos from that night spread quickly through. Linda sent me a shaky video whispering through her. My parents, even my dad, who had warned me to admitted that maybe some of them saying I lived in a haze. Planning a wedding became sampling, if not more. He talked about our future, such conviction that every time someone, all I had to do was hold up my hand. That ring wasn't proof that proof that I lead at night. Not loud, not just soft enough. Why the need to perform our love? I told myself that I was conditioned to doubt because of past, to give me a story worth. I silenced that whisper. The others. Love was supposed to be loud, I thought. Love was supposed to be undeniable. And Ethan had made ours undeniable to everyone. Still, something about the way he had orchestrated every detail lingered in my chest, like a knot I couldn't quite untangle. He hadn't asked me what kind of proposal I wanted. He hadn't even hinted at it. He had chosen for me, crafted it for me, decided what my dream should look like, and then delivered it flawlessly. At the time, I told myself that was devotion. Later, I learned it was control. The weeks that followed blurred together in the kind of happiness that feels almost too perfect, like a painting where the colors are too bright, the lines too sharp. Ethan's attentiveness didn't fade after the proposal. If anything, it intensified. He called daily to talk about wedding plans. He insisted on handling details I barely had time to think about. He reassured me that I didn't need to stress, that he wanted to take care of everything. And though part of me felt relieved, another part felt unnecessary. But whenever that thought tried to surface, Ethan drowned it with gestures. A surprise brunch with my bridesmaids. A handwritten letter slipped into my purse. A weekend getaway where he toasted to our forever under the stars. He knew exactly how to keep me anchored in the fantasy. And it worked. Every single time. My friends who had once worried now smiled and nodded when I showed them updates on the wedding plans. My parents began to talk about Ethan like he was already family. The few people who still whispered doubts quickly faded into the background, because how could anyone question a man who proposed with roses, music, and a diamond that sparkled like fire? I thought I had silenced all the voices, the ones around me and the one inside me. I thought the ring on my finger meant my doubts were nothing but shadows, and I thought the story we were, but I was wrong, because behind that ring was a truth darker than I could, and the man who promised me a wedding should be the happiest time, unless it's built on lies. And though I didn't know it then, every flower I picked, every song I chose, every joyful decision I made was laid carefully over a foundation already cracked. I thought I was planning the beginning of forever, but what I was really building was the stage for my heartbreak. After Ethan's proposal, life became a blur of champagne toasts, Pinterest boards, and endless conversations about the future. It felt like I had been dropped straight into the center of the fairy tale I had always dreamed of. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends asking about bridesmaid dresses. My mom called daily with suggestions, and Ethan's name became the one word that I was the bride-to-be, and people treated me like I was. At first I loved. I soaked in the attention, the sense of being. I wanted to savor every moment of I do to them. Ethan seemed equally invested. He joined me at cake. He nodded enthusiastically. He even pretended to care about flowers, though I could tell he didn't know a peony from a rose. He made me feel like we were a team, tackling every day. But as weeks turned into months, at first I chalked them up to weddings are overwhelming. It's normal for for grooms to occasionally zone out. I convinced myself nothing more, but something about him. Sometimes, while I rambled excited, I'd catch him staring off into the distance, his jaw tight. When I asked what he was thinking, he'd flash that perfect smile and it looked convincing, but deep down it felt off, like he was masking something behind that smile. Then there were the inconsistencies. Ethan was meticulous about our plans, but every now and then things didn't add up. He'd tell me he had to work late, but when I called his office, no one picked. He'd claim he was exhausted, but then I'd see photos online of him out with friends. When I confronted him, he always had an explanation ready. Smooth, effortless, the kind of answer that made me feel guilty for. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was projecting old insecurities onto a man who had only ever given me reasons to trust him. After all, hadn't he proposed in front of dozens of... Hadn't he shown the world how... I clung to the memory of that, using it to... But my friends noticed. Linda, who had been cautious from the beginning, started raising her eyebrows whenever Ethan left early or brushed off plans. "Don't you think he's been acting different lately?" she asked one night as we sat on my couch, flipping through bridal magazines. "Like, distracted?" I felt my defenses rise immediately. "He's just stressed," I snapped. "You have no idea how much pressure he's under." She held up her hands in surrender, but her silence spoke louder than her words. Even my mom, who had been swept up in the romance of the proposal, began to ask questions. "Sweetheart, are you sure he's okay?" she asked gently. "He seems distant sometimes. Marriage is a big step. Maybe he's nervous?" I nodded along, forcing a smile. "Of course he's nervous. We both are. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love me." I wanted so badly to believe my own words. Ethan, meanwhile, doubled down on his gestures whenever tension surfaced. If he sensed my unease, he'd arrive with flowers, book a surprise dinner, or write me a heartfelt note about how excited he was to be my husband. And just like that, my doubts would melt away. He was so good at pulling me back into the fantasy, so skilled at making me feel foolish for ever questioning him. But there were nights I couldn't silence the unease. Nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why a man so perfect nights when his phone buzzed in the middle and he'd quickly silence it with nights when his mind seemed that no relation, that all couples, that what mattered was the I convinced myself were small, insignificant, temporary, but the cracks were growing and I was the only one pretending. One afternoon, as I sat with my bridesmaids discussing dresses, I caught them exchanging glances when Ethan called to our venue tour. "He's probably just busy," defensive before they even asked. But I saw the doubt in their eyes, and it scared me. Not because I thought they were right, but because a part of me wondered. The truth is, I didn't want to admit that the fairy tale. I had already told the world our story. I had already held up my hand. I had already convinced everyone, and myself, that Ethan was mine. Admitting doubt felt, so I brushed it off. Every distraction, every uneasy glance from. I buried them all beneath. I chose to focus on the believe in, because the alternative, that my perfect fiancé wasn't who he seemed, was too terrifying to face. I brushed off the signs, not knowing those signs were screaming the truth, and by the time I was ready to hear them, it would be too late. Because the lies weren't just cracks in our foundation, they were the foundation itself. Love can blind you, but only for so long. At first, the glow of Ethan's devotion was enough to shield me from every doubt, every uneasy thought, every subtle sign that something was. But love's light doesn't last forever. It flickers, and when it dims, shadows appear. That's when I started noticing the cracks. Small at first, almost invisible, but they were there, growing, waiting to shatter everything I thought I knew. In the early months of our engagement, Ethan was everywhere. He showed up at cake tastings, flipped through floral arrangements, made toasts about our future that melted every ounce of doubt from us. But then, imperceptibly, he began to withdraw. It started with excuse. He had always been ambitious, but suddenly work became late meetings, last minute. His career seemed to demand more and more of him, and though he framed it as temporary, the distance it created was undeniable. Nights that once belonged, staring at my phone, waiting for a text that often came too. When he was home, he was present physically, but I'd talk about wedding details, our honeymoon, the playlist for our and though he nodded, his eyes sometimes looked, his responses delayed. I'd catch him staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen before quickly said if even that small. At first, I gave it of the doubt. I told myself this was no. Weddings were stressful, careers were demanding, and maybe he just needed space. I reminded myself that no man. I noticed a text message each time he sued overthinking, that that his busyness was, that the man I had always been a mask. The battle consumed me. I oscillated between trust and suspicion so often it felt like I was living two. One where I was the lucky bride-to-be, blissfully planning her wedding, and another where I was a woman staring at wondering if she had been a fool all along. But instead of confronting the truth, I turned the blame in. I told myself I was needy. I reminded myself of past years had ruined good things, and I vowed not to repeat that. I buried my doubts under layers of self-blame, convincing myself that if I just trusted harder, loved deeper, believed more fiercely, everything would return. And sometimes Ethan made it. He still knew when to turn. He still showed up with flowers, still kissed my forehead, still whispered promises. Those moments were proof that the man but they were fleeting, never enough to elude. My friends noticed before it grew quieter. My bridesmaids exchanged looks when he canceled another planning. My mother, usually asked gently if and every time I defended him, fiercely, I became the protector of the shield against. He's under pressure. He's working so hard. You don't understand. But deep down, I could feel the shift. The worst part, it wasn't the missed call. It was the silence. I tried to feel that distractions were, that once the wedding was behind. But denial is fragile. It only takes one crack, and that crack came when I was at his apartment, curled up on the couch, Minutes stretched. When he finally emerged from the bed, his expression was, but his voice carried a tension. I just work stuff. But the truth was in his eyes. First time I saw for a flicker. Hold on to. A shadow. A secret. Something that had nothing to do with work, nothing to do with me, but everything to do with why he was drifting away. I told myself I imagined it. That stress and exhaustion had made me see what wasn't there. But deep down, I knew. Because love can blind you, but only for so long. And that night, for the very first time, I caught the real glimpse of betrayal. It was just one text message, but it shattered my world. One small line glowing on his screen, one moment of chance where his guards. I wish I could say I looked, that I respected his pride, that I trusted him the way a fiancé. But when love has already begun to feel fragile, when cracks have already begun to spread, even the smallest detail can look like a and that text was my scream. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night that should have been ordinary. I was at Ethan's apartment, sitting on the couch, flipping through bridal magazines. My mind was swimming with wedding details, lace or satin, indoor or outdoor, band or the usual bride-to-be that should have consumed. But my eyes kept drifting to him, sitting face down on the coffee. That was Ethan's. His phone never sat face, not once. At first, I thought it was sweet, a sign that he valued our time. But by this point, it felt different. It felt deliberate, protective, almost secretive. And that night, curiosity clawed at me, and when the phone buzzed, for a moment I could, but my hand moved before me. On the screen was a preview, just one. Last night was perfect. I stared at the word, my mind racing. My first thought was, it must be work-related. It has to be but the tone, it didn't sound like business. Before I could open the message, the shower shut off. Panic surged through me. I quickly set the phone back down, face down exactly as my hands trembled. I scrambled to look, flipping a Ethan emerged, towel around his waist, smiling the way that perfect flaw. But inside, I was. For the rest of the night, I tried to act normal. I laughed at his jokes. I ate the takeout. I let him pull me into. But my mind wasn't in. It was trapped on that glowing line. Those words I couldn't erase. Finally, I could hold it in anymore. As we were cleaning up, I said lightly, too casually, "Hey, who was texting you earlier?" Ethan didn't even flinch. His expression remained smooth, effortless. He shrugged. "Oh, just work. They're always bothering me." After hours, I swallowed hard. It seemed personal. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that same steady calm. He chuckled softly, brushing it off with ease. "Babe, you're reading too much into it. You know how clients get. Half the time they think I'm their therapist. Trust me, nothing to worry about." The way he said it, so confident, so convincing, made me feel ridiculous for even asking. He reached out, touched my cheek, and smiled. "I would never hurt you. You know that, right?" And just like that, the fight drained from me. I wanted so badly to believe him that I let his words wrap around me like a blanket. I nodded, smiled weakly, but deep down, the seed of suspicion had been. That night, as he held me close in bed, I lay awake staring. His breathing was steady, his arm draped across, his warmth pressed against. Last night was I can't stop thinking, what did it mean? Why was he so? A battle raged in. One part of me screamed that the cracks I had been ignoring, that Ethan wasn't the perfect man. The other part clung desperately to whispering that I sabotaging my own. I remembered my past relations, the way suspicion had poisoned them. I remembered the promises myself not to let old scars. Maybe, I thought, I was just repeating a mistake. Maybe Ethan really was telling. The self-blame was. I told myself I was being crazy. No healthy relationship survives with that. If I kept questioning him, I'd push him away. I even scolded myself for looking at his phone and convinced I was the one. He showed up at my not roses this bright, cheerful. He took me to lunch, held my hand, and talked about. By the time dessert arrived, he was too attentive, too loving, too convincing to be. Maybe that text, maybe the problem wasn't him. It was me. That's the cruelty of gaslighting. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It makes you question your instincts, your sanity. It makes you believe that love means silence, that trust means blindness, that doubt means disloyalty. For weeks I lived in that haze. Whenever suspicion crept in, Ethan smothered it with affection. Whenever doubt surfaced, he buried it with gestures. He became even more attentive than usual, as though he could sense the war inside me and knew exactly how to win it. Because the alternative, the possibility that he wasn't who I thought he was. But no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the text haunted me. At night, in the quiet, I would hear the words echoing in my. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking of it. It became a ghost in our relationship, invisible but always waiting. I told myself it was a mistake. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself love was stronger than suspicion. But the truth? The truth was that text wasn't a mistake. It was the start of the truth unraveling. And no matter how hard I tried to silence it, that one message would become the thread that pulled my entire life up. When doubt creeps in, curiosity becomes dangerous. It starts small, an itch in the back of your mind, a whisper you try to ignore. But once suspicion plants itself in your heart, it grows like wildfire. That's what happened to me. After that one text message, after the gaslighting, after the endless cycle of charm and distraction, I couldn't silence the voice inside me anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. For weeks, I played the role of the perfect fiancé, smiling at family dinners, gushing about venues, posting photos of us. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling. My heart told me to trust him, protect the fantasy we had. My mind told me something was wrong, that Ethan's story wasn't holding. So I did what I swore I'd never do. I began to watch him, closely, secretly. At first, it was harmless, just little observation. I started noting how often his phone buzzed late at night, how quickly he silenced it, how he sometimes smiled faintly before typing a response he never shared. I noticed the way he'd step out of the room to take certain calls, lowering his voice just enough to make, and I noticed how, when I asked, he always had the same work. But it was never the kind of work I could pin down. One night, when he claimed he had, I decided to check social media. I wasn't looking for it, just hoping for reassurance. Instead, what I found deepened my unease. A friend of a friend had posted a photo from nothing unusual, just a casual night. But in the corner of that photo, blurry yet not in work clothes, not surrounded by but laughing with a group of people, a woman's arm brushed his, and though it could have been innocent, my chest tightened as I stared at the image, zooming in it. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. When I confronted him the next day, I did it lightly, careful not to sound accusatory. Hey, were you at a bar last night? Yeah, after work a couple of us grabbed drinks. Why? Funny, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, because I thought you had to stay late at the office. His response was smooth, rehearsed. We finished earlier than expected. It was last minute. Sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't think it was a big deal. And again, I doubted myself. His tone was so calm, so confident, that I felt silly for even asking. Maybe I was being controlling. Maybe I was overanalyzing. Maybe I was the problem. But the more I tried to silence the suspicion, the louder it became. I started paying attention to his schedule. The late nights, the sudden urgent meetings, the unexplained absences. They all formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. There were nights he claimed to be swamped at work, yet when I called his office, no one answered. Times he said he was exhausted, but his social media showed him tagged in place. Little inconsistencies on their own might mean nothing, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. And so, I crossed a line I had never imagined. One evening, when he left his phone unattended, I picked it up. My hand shook as I scrolled through my heart pounding so loudly I could. Most of his conversations were normal. Family, coworkers, casual friends, but one thread stood out. It was labeled with just an initial. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The messages weren't explicit, not enough to scream affair, but the undertones were undeniable. Inside jokes, late-night exchanges, references to missing last time. Each message was vague enough to explain away, but together they whispered intimacy. When I asked about it, again, lightly, carefully, Ethan's response was as smooth as ever. Oh, that's just a client. She gets chatty sometimes. Honestly, it's annoying. He laughed, kissed my forehead, and changed the subject. And once again, I let myself be pulled back into his orbit. But at night, alone in my apartment, the doubt consumed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. I replayed every Why did my instinct age with questions, suspicions, to demand the truth no matter how much it hurt?
But another part of me, perhaps the stronger part, was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if I pushed too hard and ruined everything? What if love required patience, not suspicion? That tug of war nearly broke me. In my weaker moments, I convinced myself to let it go, to trust him, to believe in us, to stop digging. But curiosity is relentless once it's awakened. It gnaws at you, refuses to let you rest. And no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the need
To know grew stronger every day. So I kept digging. I started checking his tagged photos, scrolling through mutual friends' feeds late into the night. I noticed the way he stopped posting about us as often, while I was still sharing every highlight of our engagement. I even drove past his office once, late at night, to see if he was really there. His car wasn't in the lot. That was the moment I realized I was no longer protecting our love. I was hot investigating it, and with every inconsistency I uncovered, my heart sank deep. The final straw came on a Friday night. Ethan told me he had to stay late again, working on a major project. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't take the half-truths anymore, the endless loop of suspicion and denial. So I decided to test him. I called his office phone at 9 p.m. No answer. I called again at 9:15. Still nothing. Finally, at 9:30, a voicemail picked up. His voicemail, cheerful and professional, but no Ethan. I sat on my couch, staring at the clock, my hands trembling. My chest tightened with the crushing realization that I was living in a... I didn't know what the truth was yet, but I knew this much. It wasn't what he was telling me. Tears poured down my face as I whispered to my... What are you doing? Who are you with? I wanted to stop. I wanted to shut my eyes and return to the fantasy. But once you start pulling at it, and then one discovered, one moment that, because what I uncovered next was suspicion, it's undeniable, and that truth was because when the lies I realized I had from the very circle, after weeks of suspicion, after nights spent, proof that my fiancé, the man who promised me forever, was not just unfaithful. It happened late one night. I was at his apartment, waiting for him to reach. My nerves were stretched thin. Normally, his devices always... But that night, for reasons I'll never know, the screen was awake, logged into. I told myself not to. I told myself I had already crossed it, but curiosity... And so, at first it was work email. Then I saw it, a folder tucked away at the bottom, innocuous, personal. Some short and cryptic, others long. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, my palms slick with sweat. They weren't the words of colleagues or casual acquaintances. They were the words of lovers. I can still taste you from last night. She has no idea. It's almost too easy. I wish it were you at the altar instead. I felt my entire body go cold. My stomach twisted violently. My hands shook so badly I could barely scroll. But the deeper I went, the worse it became. There were photos too. Grainy selfies taken in dim lighting, snapshots from hotel rooms, the kind of intimacy that left no room for And then I saw the name. Not just a name. Her name. Linda, my best friend, my bridesmaid, the woman who had introduced me to Ethan that very first night at the gala. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the desk, gasping for air, as the betrayal crashed into me. It wasn't just Ethan. It wasn't just my fiancé. It was her. The woman I trusted with my secret, my laughter, my future wedding vow. The woman who had stood beside me smiling, pretending to celebrate my happiness while stealing it. The email stretched back months. Months of lies, months of stolen moments, months of deception that played out right under every text, every distracted smile. It was her. It had always been her. Tears blurred my vision as I slammed the lap. The betrayal was... This wasn't just heartbreak. This was annihilation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm out, call them both. But instead, the images burned into Ethan's hand, the smug cruel for every time. Traffic's bad. Can't wait to finally walk through the... I was sitting on that same flawless smile, leaning down to... I turned my face. For a moment, grief. I realized that confronting him now would give him the power to lie again, to manipulate, to twist the truth until I doubted myself all over again. And I was done doubting. So I smiled. Forced, brittle, but convincing enough. Hey, how was work? His smile deepened, oblivious, exhausting, but worth it. The audacity made my blood boil, but I swallowed it down. That night, I played along. I let him hold me, let him kiss me, let him whisper the same empty he had whispered 100 times before, and all the while, I kept the truth locked inside me. For days, I carried the secret. Every glance at Lynn, every kiss from Ethan, and yet they thought I was... But I had... One final night, I looked like the glowing with love, floating on the ferry, in closed doors, because while everyone saw a woman, what they didn't see, the revenge I was quite... After I discovered the truth, Ethan's affair with Lynn, my closest friend and bride, something inside me cracked. I cried until my body ached, until my throat burned, until the tears... But once the grief passed, a new emotion took a sharp, white-hot every ounce of love I'd ever felt for... And with that anger came... I realized that the power... He thought he was in control, orchestrating a double life, manipulating me. But now I had the truth. So I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I would tear his. Walked into brunch. Linda sat the very same. My stomach churned every word out of her. But I played along. I'm so lucky to have you, I told her, my voice steady though my heart screamed, and she smiled, oblivious, as though she believed she still had me fooled. That's when I realized something important. The mask wasn't just for you, it was for her too. Day by day, I became an At work, I showed coworkers pictures of wedding venues. With family, I gushed about Ethan's thoughtfulness. With friends, I squealed over dresses. I played the part so well but behind closed doors. At night, when Ethan held me, I stared at the ceiling, silently counting. When he kissed me, knowing one day I'd not in love, but in front of an audience, not of wedding plans. Every screenshotted messages, saved email. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. But carrying that secret, the emotional toll of living. During the day, I smiled so wide my cheek. At night, I cried into my. Sometimes I wanted to scream. Other times, I wanted to curl up and to let the weight of But every morning I put the mask back, and strangely, because every smile I faked, every lie I told reminded me that they thought they were playing me. And the longer I wore the mask, the closer I got to the day I'd rip it off in front. The hardest part was pretending with Linda. She was still by my side, still helping plan, still pretending. I watched her, endured her endless texts. Each moment was agony, but I forced myself to smile. Sometimes I caught her looking at Ethan during group gathering, a flicker of something in her eyes, quickly hidden. And every time rage burned inside. But I swallowed it down because I knew my silence now would make the Ethan, meanwhile, grew bolder in his. He still fed me excuses, still silenced his, still brushed off my side. But he never suspected I knew. He never suspected I had already seen it. That was his mistake. And while he carried on his charade, I began to plan mine. I thought about the wedding day constantly. Not the vows, not the dress. The music. Number. I thought about the moment I'd strip the mask away and expose them both. The moment when family and friends, gathered in their finals, would witness the I'd carried alone. The moment when the stage they had built for a lie. That vision fueled me. It kept me alive when the pain was unbearable, when the loneliness. It gave me purpose. But purpose doesn't erase suffering. There were nights I broke down, clutching my chest, gasping for air, as sobs racked my body. Nights I whispered to myself, how could they do this to me? Over and over, like a prayer that would never be answered. Nights I almost picked up the phone to call someone, anyone, to unload the truth. But I never did, because deep down I wanted the reveal to be mine. I wanted to hold the cards until the very end. Every encounter with Ethan and Linda became smiling when I, laughing when I, acting when I want. And the scariest part? They never suspect. That's the thing about liars. They believe their own lies so deeply that they can't imagine any. Ethan thought I was blinded by love. Linda thought I was blinded by friendship. They didn't realize I was seeing everything with new eyes, sharper than ever. As the wedding day crept closer, the weight of the mask grew. People kept telling me how radiant, how lucky I was, and each compliment cut like a knife because I knew the truth. I wasn't radiant. A wedding is supposed to be magical. Mine was unforgettable for the wrong reasons. If anyone looked at me that morning, they would have seen a radiant bride, glowing with anticipation. What they couldn't see was the war raging inside. They couldn't see the secrets hidden under or the plan I carried in my chest. Everyone else was preparing for vows and was preparing for The day began in the bridal suite, where laughter and perfume flew. My dress hung by the window, glowing in the sunlight as if it belonged to a woman who still believed in happy. My bridesmaids were sipping mimosas, singing along to a pop. Linda was there too, smiling, playing her role. Watching her felt like swallowing. She still had the audacity to act like to stand beside me, to fuss over the details of my wedding. I forced myself to. That had become my wearing the mask, every curl pinned into place, every brush of blood, every soft downstairs, filling the court. Candles flicked. Everything was perfect. Meanwhile, Ethan probably charming the foot, acting like the man everyone. If he thought about the email, somehow I doubted it. Men like Ethan believed the photographers, my bridesmaids. Linda's fingers split second. But then I remembered whose hands those were. The same hands that had touched was the coldest smile I had. When the coordinator came, it's almost time, she said cheerfully. The words rippled through the room, electrifying everyone. My bridesmaid squealed, my mother dabbed her eyes, and Linda squeezed my hand like she was part of the dream. None of them knew that dream was about to become a nightmare. The procession began. From my hiding spot behind the doors, I watched the flower girls scatter petals, the bridesmaids glide gracefully, the groomsmen smile for the cameras. I heard the murmurs of guests, the rustle of fabric, the sigh of anticipation. Finally, the doors opened for me. The courtyard bathed in golden light as every face turned toward me. My father's arm was steady under mine, his eyes proud. Guests gasped softly, phones lifted to capture the moment. I looked straight ahead at Ethan, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, smiling like a man in love. To anyone else, it was the look of devotion. To me, it was the mask of a liar. Each step down the aisle, my bouquet trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of the family and friends smiled at me with such innocence, such joy, and I wondered if they would. At the altar, my father kissed my cheek. His touch was warm, familiar. He leaned in and whispered, because even in this moment, he still thought his charm could blind me. The officiant began, speaking words about love, about forever, about union. My chest tightened with every phrase. I glanced sideways at Linda, standing in her bridesmaid, her eyes misty with fake emotion. My stomach turned. She looked like my best friend, like the girl who held my hair back when I was sick, who cheered for me. Now she was nothing but a shadow. Then came the vows. Ethan went first. His words were beautiful, flawless, rehearsed like a... He spoke about destiny, about how he knew from the first moment we met, how he promised to... His voice trembled just enough to convince, but I knew better. Every word was a... When it was my turn, I took the microphone. My vows began. I spoke about love. Ethan smiled. Every word was meant. But beneath the poetry, my voice carried steady, but my eyes burned with the knowledge. The guests leaned in, hanging on my words, oblivious to the... My father watched with my mother with tears. Linda shifted slightly, but my gut told me she felt something. Maybe it was guilt, maybe fear, maybe just... The officiant moved to... The rings? The best man fumbled the velvet box, drawing laughter from the crowd. Ethan slipped the band onto my finger, his smile wider than ever. I slid his on, my heart pounding, my breath sharp. The moment was nearly here. The officiant's voice rose as he prepared to pronounce us husband and wife. The string quartet lifted their bows, ready to play. Guests leaned forward, cameras flashing. Ethan squeezed my hand, and in that instant, I looked straight into his eyes. For the first time, I wasn't blind. I saw him clearly, charming, deceitful, arrogant, and completely unaware that his world... And then, standing at the altar, I unleashed the... They thought they were... Instead, every guest dressed, every candle, all of it said... Because while the world believed, the officiant smiled, his words floating over... Marriage is built on love. My heart was pounding too... My bouquet shook in my hand, but it wasn't nerves. It was rage pulsing through. I glanced at Ethan, his face composed, his smile flawless. To the guests, he looked like the... To me, he looked like the light. And now, the officiants... The bride and groom will share. Ethan went first. His voice was smooth, warm. He spoke about destiny, about how he knew from the first night we met was the one. He painted himself as devoted, as a man ready to... Guests dabbed their eyes. He ended with a promise, but all I felt with arrogance was my turn. The officiant handed me my hands no... My voice went... I began the way I thanked Ethan for the... Guests leaned in. I looked directly into... Marriage is built on trust. Without those things, there... A ripple moved through the crowd. Murmurs. Ethan's smile faltered slightly before snapping back into place. I took a deep breath and continued. Today, in front of everyone we love, I was supposed to promise you forever. But how can I promise forever to a man who already gave pieces of himself to someone else? Gasps erupted. Guests shifted in their seat. My father frowned. My mother's hand flew to her. Ethan's face went pale. He reached for my hand, whispering sharply, "What are you doing?" I pulled back. My grip on the microphone tightened. What I should have done. The courtyard fell. Ethan has been having an affair with Linda Chaos. Gasps turned. Some guests shouted. For a moment the look in her. With her? My father shot to his. My mother wept. "That's not true," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's lying. She's just overwhelmed. Cold feet." But I cut him off. "Don't you dare gaslight me. Don't you dare lie in front of everyone when I have the proof." And then, with deliberate calm, I tapped my bouquet. The coordinator, oblivious to the drama, thought it was the cue for the slideshow. She signaled the AVT. The projector flickered to life on the reception hall wall. At first, soft music played, and guests expected photos of Ethan and me, a montage of childhoods, and instead, image after image filled the screen. Screenshots of emails, text messages, photos he had sent to Lynn. Words like, "Last night was perfect," and "She has no idea." Pictures of them together in places he told me he was working late. The proof was undeniable, devastating, and public. The guests gasped louder with each. Some turned away, others stared, horrified. A woman in the back muttered, I didn't look at the screen. I kept my eyes on Ethan. His jaw clenched. He grabbed my arm. Turn it off. Stop this. I yanked my arm away. You did this. Not me. Humiliated yourself. Then finally, guilt was written all over. Guests turned on her too. One of my bridesmaids. Any denial could ever be. Ethan tried one last desperate move. He turned to the crowd, his voice raised, pleading. She's making this up. This isn't real. But his words fell flat, drowned out by the images still cycling on the screen behind us. The evidence spoke louder than any lie he could. The officiant, stunned, lowered his book and stepped back. The guests sat in shocked silence, eyes darting between. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. This wedding is over. The only vow made here today was The courtyard exploded again. Shouts, whispers. Some guests stood, unsure whether to stay frozen in the. My father stormed toward, fury radiating. My mother sobbed into. Friends covered their mouth, veil trembling in the heart pound. For the first time in months but the fallout was. The wedding was ruined. Most brides I remember mine as the day everyone. Because betrayal doesn't. It lingers, spreading like smoke long after the fire. The courtyard was chaos after. Guests rose from their seats, whispering mix of shock, pity. Some reached, while others stared at Ethan. A few guests looked uncomfortable, not because of what he had done. People love a scandal, but they hate being close enough to smell the ash. My father was at my side, his hand on my back, protective and, come with me, said, guiding me away. My mother clutched my hand with trembling fingers, tears streaking her makeup. My bridesmaids, except Linda, of course, surrounded me, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Behind us, Ethan, his voice carried over the crowd, desperate. It's not true. She's making it up. You don't understand. His words tangled into nonsense as he tried to spin the story, tried to claw back some version of control. But the evidence had already spoken. The photos, the messages, the silence on Linda's. They told the truth louder than I ever. Linda stood frozen near the altar, her bouquet discarded, her every guest's eyes burned into. She tried once to speak, her lips parting, but no sound. The weight of her inside the bridal. Sweet, my mother helped me out of my veil, her hand shaking as. Sweetheart, you did what you had, she whispered. You were brave. I wanted to believe her, but bravery didn't feel like this. It didn't feel like sitting in a torn-apart dream. Mascara streaked down my face, wearing a dress meant for a future that no longer. Ethan burst in, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Please just let me explain. His voice trembled. It didn't mean anything. You're the one I want. Don't throw this away. I stared at him, at the man I once thought was mine, and all I saw was a cat. You already threw it away. The moment you touched her, the moment you loved her, pretending to be. You don't get to spin. His eyes glistened, but I knew better. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. Fear of losing his image. Fear of losing me. Fear of the world seeing him for what he truly. He dropped to his knees, hands clasped as though begging for mercy. Please don't do this, he whispered. The irony was saying, don't do this to us. As if I had been the one sneaking, as if I had betrayed myself. My father stepped forward, his voice sharp. You need to leave. Ethan's head snapped up, his mask cracked. He looked around wildly, realizing no one was on his. Not me, not my parents, not the guests who had just witnessed his disgrace. With a final desperate look in my direction, he stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. The suite fell silent except for the sound of my mother's soft sob. The hours after blurred together in fragments. Guests offering hugs, friends whispering sympathy. My bridesmaids, those who weren't part of the betrayal, standing close like sheep. People brought me water, food I couldn't eat. Some guests left quickly, eager to escape the discomfort of. Others lingered, gossip all. Story spread through friends. My phone buzzed and I can't believe it. You didn't deserve that. Social media exploded with sympathy, and of course judge. Some praised me for exposing the truth. Others criticized me, calling it dramatic, unnecessary. That was the cruelest part. Realizing that even when you're the one betrayed, people still find a way to blame you. Ethan tried to control the narrative. He reached out to friends, spinning stories about how I had exaggerated, how Linda had meant nothing, how it was just a stupid mistake. He even showed up at my apartment once, flowers in hand, eyes red with crocodile. Please, he begged. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. You're the only one I want to marry. I slammed the door in his face. But slamming the door didn't slam out. Nights became torture. I'd wake up gasping, dreams of the wedding replaying in fragments. My chest felt heavy, my heart bruised. I replayed every moment of our relationship, every kiss, every laugh, and wondered how much my family rallied. My mother came, my father called every weren't enough. It convinces you to. One night, the guests had left, but the betrayal, and that's when I realized. When your heart shatters, you either stay broken or rebuild stronger. In the aftermath of betrayal, I had a choice to let the pain define me or to rise from it. At first, I didn't know if I had the strength to rise. The cracks in my soul felt too deep, the shame too heavy, the loneliness too suffocating. But slowly, piece by piece, not the life I thought I wanted, but the one I realized I'd. The weeks after the wedding felt like walking through. Every day was an effort just to breathe, to get out of bed, to exist in a world where my therapy became my life. I sat in a small sunlit office with a soft-spoken woman, Hayes, and for the first time, I allowed myself to spill, twisting to. I ignored the sign. Betrayal isn't a. Her words didn't. For so long, I told myself I were more attentive. Maybe he wouldn't have. But slowly, I began to understand everything about the betrayal. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt. Other days I collapsed. I missed him sometimes. Not the man he was. Mourning a ghost that haunts I tried to banish. I avoided places, the rooftop rest, even the groceries, his favorite cereal, every detail of life. But little by little, I took long walks alone, letting the rhythm of my foot. I picked up hobbies I had that didn't need. I filled my apartment the way Linda began to rebuild not just my heart, but my boundaries. I promised myself I would never again let someone else define my worth. Support from family and true friends carried me through. My father's nightly calls, my mother's quiet presence in my apartment, my bridesmaids, minus Linda, who showed up with takeout, refusing to let. They reminded me I wasn't alone, even when loneliness screamed louder. Slowly, my reflection began. I no longer saw just a woman. I saw someone scarred, bruised but stand. I saw resilience in my determination in my. I began to believe I could rise from this wreckage. Of course, there were moments of nights when I scrolled through, wondering if I had overreacted. If forgiveness could have been possible. Times when I replayed Ethan's pleas at the bridal, his desperate for a heartbeat. Shame followed quickly, reminding me how dangerous the weight on my. I started saying yes to coffee with friends, a weekend trip. I joined a book club, laughing with became allies. Life once shattered, and this time, no masks, no lies. I thought I was fine, but healing doesn't erase. It only makes space, and sometimes the past has a way of finding you. Knocking at your door. But just as I was healing, the past came knocking again. Some men can't handle, especially when it's there. Ethan had already lost me, lost the wedding, lost the perfect image. But men like him don't fade. They claw their way back, armed with and manipulation. And one night, when I least expected, he came back into my. Not to apologize, but to convince me to surrender the strength. It happened on a rainy Thursday. I had just returned home from therapy, feeling lighter than I had. I had cooked myself dinner of wine and curled up with a book. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder shaking the night sky. It was the kind of night meant for solitude, for reflection. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps at my door. At first, I ignored it, but when it came again, louder, more insistent, unease rippled through me. I set my book aside, heart racing, and peered through the peephole. My breath caught. It was Ethan. He was drenched from the rain, his suit clinging to him, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked nothing like the polished man I once. His eyes were wild, desperate, filled with something between regret and determination. For a long moment I froze, my hand hovering over the. Finally, I opened the door just enough to. What do you want? His voice raw. Just let me in. We need to talk. Every instinct screamed to slam, but part of me, the part that had once loved him so fiercely, hesitated. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He walked in, dripping water onto my floor, his presence filling the room like a. He turned to face me, his chest heaving. But I can't lose you. I won't. I crossed my arms, keeping distance, but. You already did. His face twisted, torn between anger and. It didn't mean anything, Linda. The words hit me like. Once they might have been enough to pull me back into it, but now they rang hollow. We were perfect together. Remember the rooftop? You can't tell me you didn't. Nostalgia, his favorite weapon. He painted pictures of the past like masterpiece, hoping I would forget the crack. For a split second I owned the warmth of his hand, the butterflies of early days. But then I remembered the text message, the emails, the photos, Linda's guilty eye, and the warmth turned to fire. You're right, I said. He flinched but quickly recovered, his voice urged. People make mistakes. Couples go through things. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start fresh, rebuild. Don't throw away what we have. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I didn't throw it away. Did he move closer again, desperation bleeding through his words? I can't live without you. You're everything to me. Don't you see? Losing you's killing me. I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved, or the man who betrayed me. I saw someone pathetic, clinging not to me, but to the image of himself he had. He didn't want me back because he loved me. He wanted me back because losing me meant losing control. Ethan, I said firmly, this isn't love. This is you refusing to face the consequence choices. His eyes darkened, frustration flashing across his face. You're really going to do this? You're really going to let one mistake ruin everything we had? One mistake? I snapped. Dozens of messages, months of lies, an affair with my best friend. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. That's who you are. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. The rain pounded harder against the windows, thunder rolling like a drumbeat. Ethan's shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw defeat in his. But then, in a last-ditch effort, he softened his voice again. Please, just give me one more chance. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you... I shook my head slowly, my heart steady now. That man never existed. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Ethan's face crumbled. He stared at me like he didn't recognize, like the woman standing before him wasn't the same one he'd once charmed so easily. And in that moment, I realized he was right. I wasn't the same woman. I was stronger. I walked to the door and opened. He didn't move at first. His eyes glistened. You'll regret this. One day, you'll realize no one will. I looked him straight in the eye. I'd rather have no love at all. For a moment, anger flashed, but it quickly dissolved into... Finally, with one last look, he stepped out into... I shut the door. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, tears streaming. Not because I missed him. I had finally closed. It hurt, but it was also liberating. And with one final choice, sometimes the most powerful love story. For so long, I thought my life on being worthy of another, but love that comes out. And when I finally broke free, when I finally closed the chapter, myself. The weeks after his desperate return were both painful and liberating. Painful because endings always hurt, no matter how necessary they are. Liberating because for the first time in years, my story was mine again. Ethan was no longer a shadow hovering over my decisions. He was a scar, yes, but scars are proof of survival. And I was done surviving. I was ready to live. I spent long evenings reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The girl who once believed in fairy tales, who mistook grand gestures for loyalty, who silenced her instincts in the name of love. The woman who stood at the altar, not to say I do, but to rip the mask off a liar and reclaim her. The broken soul who cried into her pillow, questioning her worth. And finally, the fighter who rebuilt herself, brick by brick, with resilience stronger than before. It was a brutal path. Love, suspicion, betrayal, heartbreak, anger, resolve, shock, shame, empowerment. Each stage had nearly destroyed me. Each stage also. Therapy became less about surviving and more about... I learned to trust my voice again, to listen when my intuition whispered. I let go of the shame that had... Shame wasn't mine to... It belonged to Ethan, to anyone who had... My apartment, once filled with reminders of him, slowly transformed. The framed photos of our vacation, the bottle of wine he had gifted me for our anniversary, was poured down the drain. In their place, I filled my shelves with books I loved and trinkets from... It no longer looked like... It looked like mine. There were moments of weak... Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of a cologne that smelled like... Or hear a song, but instead of drowning in it, nostalgia was no longer... One afternoon, Families laughed on the grass. Children chased bubbles. Couples strolled hand... For a moment, I froze, the memory flashing vividly. The roses, the diamond sparkling. But then I realized something. It no longer hurt. That proposal, once the pinnacle of my fairy tale, had become just another chapter. It didn't define me anymore. It didn't own me. With freedom came... I started saying yes to things. I traveled alone, discovering the... I enrolled in a photography, capturing the world through someone else's friend. I joined a local women where I listened to... For the first time, it became a story of betrayal's darkness. And through it all, I learned the most important lesson of my life. I am enough. With or without love, with or without someone's approval, I am enough. Ethan tried one last time to contact me, an email this time, long and pleading, filled with empty promises of change. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence was my answer, and silence was stronger than any words I could have written. For years he had dictated the script of our relation. Now I held a pen. Linda never reached out. Maybe she couldn't face, maybe she didn't care. Either way, her absence was its own kind of betrayal. Had taken her out of my life, and I didn't miss her. What I once thought was friendship had only been proximity. True friends don't stab you in the back. They hold you up when the world tries to knock you down. As months turned into a year, people began to ask, "Are you ready to date again?" The question used to sting, as if my worth depended on finding. But eventually I smiled because the truth was, not yet, maybe not ever. For the first time, because being alone isn't empty. It's knowing that you can say your story doesn't need enough. I look back on and I didn't see. I saw a woman. I saw someone who wanted my story. Hear me now. You are enough. You are stronger you are more than the heartbreak, and you are worthy of a love that doesn't require. That's what betrayal. That's what survival carved into my. And that's the story I choose to. Not of being broken, but of being reborn. The night I finally felt closure, I stood by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker. The same city where Ethan had once kissed me under lampposts, where Linda had once walked beside me as if she were family, now stood as a symbol of my survival. The lights didn't look softer or sadder. They looked alive, the way I felt inside. I whispered to myself, goodbye. Not to him, not to her, but to the version of me who thought betrayal would destroy her. Because she wasn't destroyed. She had become someone stronger. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of who I was meant to be. If you connected with my story, let me know in the comments. Have you ever faced betrayal that changed you? Your voice matters here, and someone else might find strength in your words. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, and subscribe to my channel so you never miss more stories of resilience, justice, and empowerment.